A wild bear kept visiting this man's backyard. One day, he followed it and was shocked. Nathan Ellis had always dreamed of solitude, of days where the only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees, the rustling of leaves underfoot, and the call of birds echoing through the mountains. That dream had finally become his reality. Tucked away in a small log cabin near the Great Smoky Mountains, he had left behind the concrete maze of the city, the constant hum of traffic, and the endless stream of expectations that had once dictated his life. Here, in the wilderness, he had carved out a quiet existence. Mornings began with the scent of coffee mingling with fresh pine. Afternoons were spent chopping firewood or tending to the small garden he had planted behind the cabin. And evenings were reserved for reading by the glow of an oil lamp, the soft crackling of the fireplace the only company he needed. It was a life of simplicity, routine, and peace, until the bear arrived. It had been an ordinary morning when he first saw it. The air was crisp, carrying the damp scent of earth after an early autumn rain. Nathan had stepped outside with his coffee, the mug warming his hands against the morning chill. He was midway through his first sip when he noticed movement near the tree line. A massive black bear stood at the edge of his backyard, its dark eyes fixed on him, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Nathan froze, his mind racing through everything he had read about bear encounters. Don't run. Don't make sudden movements. Avoid eye contact. His body remained still, but his pulse pounded in his ears. The bear, however, did not charge. It did not snarl or stomp its feet. It merely stood there, observing him, before turning and lumbering back into the woods. Nathan let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the handle of his mug. He had known, of course, that bears roamed these mountains. It was their land far more than it was his. But knowing something and experiencing it firsthand were two different things. For the rest of the day, his thoughts were consumed by the bear. Why had it come so close? Was it looking for food? Had his presence disturbed its usual path? That night, as he sat by the fire, he found himself listening more intently to the sounds outside, half expecting to hear heavy footsteps padding through the underbrush. But the night passed without incident, and by morning, he had convinced himself it had been a one-time occurrence. Except it wasn't. Days later, the bear returned. This time, it was even closer, lingering just beyond his porch, sniffing at the air with what seemed like idle curiosity. Nathan watched from the window, his breath caught in his chest, waiting for the moment it would leave. It did, eventually retreating back into the forest as silently as it had come. But its visits became more frequent. Every few days, it would appear at the edge of his property, sometimes in the early morning, sometimes at dusk, never making a sound beyond the gentle rustling of leaves as it moved. It wasn't aggressive, wasn't scavenging, or showing signs of distress. It was simply there. At first, Nathan kept his distance, maintaining caution as he observed from behind glass or the safety of his porch. He secured his trash, ensured no food was left outside, and did everything necessary to avoid encouraging the bear to associate his home with an easy meal. But the bear never seemed interested in his supplies. It never raided his garden or overturned the wooden crates near his firewood stack. It merely watched. And slowly, Nathan found his fear giving way to fascination. One evening, he stepped outside while the bear was still there. He moved carefully, slowly, keeping his presence as unthreatening as possible. The bear lifted its head but did not move away. For a long moment, the two regarded each other across the yard. Nathan felt something shift in that moment, an unspoken understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of shared space. Then, just as it had done before, the bear turned and disappeared into the trees. Nathan couldn't explain why, but after that, he began to look forward to its visits. He found himself stepping onto the porch more often, scanning the woods for that familiar dark silhouette. It was always at a distance, always on the edge of the wilderness that Nathan had only begun to understand. He started noticing more details, how the bear's fur rippled with muscle beneath its thick coat, the way its large paws barely made a sound against the forest floor. He watched it sniff at the air, tilt its head slightly, as if listening to something beyond human perception. He realized, with a sense of quiet awe, that he was witnessing the life of a creature that had mastered this land in a way he never could. But even as his curiosity deepened, Nathan remained aware of the boundaries that existed between them. He did not attempt to lure the bear closer. He did not leave food or seek interaction. He respected its space, just as it seemed to respect his. And yet, the presence of the bear had shifted something in him. The solitude he had once sought so fervently now felt different, less like isolation, more like quiet companionship with the land itself. He had come here to escape, to retreat from the chaos of the world. But in doing so, he had unknowingly stepped into a world far older, far wiser than himself. One afternoon, as he split firewood behind the cabin, he heard the familiar rustling and turned to see the bear standing a few yards away, its dark eyes steady on him. Nathan lowered the axe slowly, wiping sweat from his brow. "You again," he murmured under his breath, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The bear huffed softly, shifting its weight, and for a fleeting moment, Nathan wondered, was it simply curiosity that kept bringing it back, or was there something more? Some unspoken recognition of his presence in this land? A silent acceptance of a human who had chosen to live not above nature, but within it? The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth between them. The bear twitched its ears, as if considering him one last time, before turning and vanishing once more into the trees. Nathan watched until the last trace of its dark fur blended with the shadows of the forest. He exhaled, gripping the handle of the axe, but his hands were no longer shaking. Nathan had told himself he wouldn't follow. He had come to respect the bear's space, its independence, the quiet presence it brought without demanding anything in return. But something about today felt different. The bear had lingered longer than usual, standing at the tree-line, turning its head back toward Nathan in a way that made his pulse quicken. It wasn't fear, not anymore. He hadn't feared the bear in weeks. It was something else. Something deeper. A pull he couldn't name. Before he could stop himself, before he could convince himself it was foolish, Nathan set down the axe, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped forward. The bear moved, and Nathan followed. The first few steps felt reckless, like breaking some unspoken rule. Yet, the bear didn't flee. It lumbered into the forest, and Nathan trailed behind, keeping a respectful distance, stepping as lightly as he could over fallen leaves and damp earth. He had never ventured this far beyond his cabin before. He knew the edges of his land well, knew where the trees thinned near the small creek, knew the rock formations that jutted up like forgotten ruins, but he had never gone past them. Yet, here he was, moving deeper into the unknown, guided by the rhythmic sway of the bear's heavy stride. The forest was different in here. The trees stood taller, their trunks thick with age, their roots twisting beneath his boots like the veins of the earth itself. The air carried a weight to it, not oppressive, but ancient, as if stepping into a space untouched by time. Nathan's breath came slower, his senses sharpening. The bear never looked back, never acknowledged his presence directly, but it never moved faster, never lost him in the winding paths between the trees. He didn't know if it was leading him or if he was simply intruding, but he couldn't bring himself to turn back. The ground sloped downward, and Nathan realized they were heading toward the creek. He had never followed it this far, had never seen the way it twisted through the valley, its waters glinting in the scattered sunlight that managed to pierce through the canopy. The bear waded through it without hesitation, the water rushing past its thick legs. But Nathan hesitated. The current wasn't strong, but the rocks were slick, and one wrong step could send him sprawling. He tested the first stone with his boot, then the next, moving with caution as the chill of the creek seeped through his soles. By the time he reached the other side, the bear was waiting, standing at the edge of a clearing that stretched out before them like a secret world. Nathan had expected more trees, more wilderness. But what he found instead was a hollow of grass and wildflowers, untouched by anything but nature's hand. The light pooled here differently, golden and soft, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. The bear moved forward, unhurried, settling near the base of an old oak with a heavy sigh. Nathan exhaled too, though he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. He took a step, then another, drawn by the quiet magic of this hidden place. For a long while, neither of them moved. Nathan stood, taking in the way the wind played with the grass, how the world here felt untouched by time. The bear stretched out near the oak, seeming content, at ease in a way Nathan had never seen before. It wasn't watching him now. It wasn't waiting. It was simply being. And for the first time in his life, Nathan understood what that meant. He sat, lowering himself carefully onto the cool earth, feeling the weight of his body settle into the land. The bear didn't stir, didn't acknowledge him, but he felt its presence as surely as he felt his own heartbeat. Hours passed. He wasn't sure how many. Time was irrelevant here. The forest breathed around him, its sounds more alive than ever, the distant call of a hawk, the rustle of unseen creatures in the brush, the wind weaving its song through the leaves. Nathan had never been more aware of the world, of himself, of how small he was in comparison to it all. He had spent so much of his life trying to carve out meaning, trying to find purpose in work, in goals, in the expectations placed upon him. But here, in this moment, he realized there was no need for any of it. The bear did not chase purpose. It did not seek validation. It simply existed, and that was enough. But the wilderness was not without its trials. The stillness was broken by the sharp snap of a branch, a sound that sent a ripple through the quiet. Nathan's body tensed before he could stop it. The bear lifted its head, its ears twitching toward the noise. Nathan turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. The rustling continued, heavier now, and before he could brace himself, a deer burst through the clearing, its slender legs carrying it with desperate speed. Nathan barely had time to process it before another sound followed, the unmistakable snarl of something predatory. A coyote. No, two. Nathan saw them then, sleek bodies moving low to the ground, eyes sharp and locked onto their fleeing prey. He had seen coyotes before, but not like this, not in the raw heat of the hunt. He felt a primal instinct to move, to run, but he forced himself to stay still. This was not his world to interfere in. Nature played by its own rules. The bear did not chase. It watched, calm, unbothered by the drama of predator and prey. Nathan forced himself to do the same, though his pulse raced. The deer vanished into the woods, the coyotes on its heels, and just as suddenly as it had begun, the clearing returned to silence. The tension in Nathan's limbs slowly eased. The bear huffed, stretching out again as if nothing had happened. Nathan exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping him before he even realized it. He had spent years worrying about the wrong things, fearing the wrong dangers. The wild had never been the enemy. It had never been something to tame or conquer. It simply was. He had come here to escape, to find something beyond the noise of the city, beyond the weight of expectations. But now, sitting here, the earth cool beneath his palms, the scent of pine thick in the air, he understood the truth. He hadn't come here to find something. He had come here to remember what it meant to be part of the world, not separate from it. As the sun dipped lower, he knew it was time to leave. He didn't want to, but he knew. He pushed himself up slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands. The bear remained where it was, eyes half-lidded in lazy contentment. Nathan hesitated for only a moment before giving the slightest nod, an unspoken goodbye, an acknowledgement of something he couldn't quite name. Then he turned, stepping back toward the trees, retracing his steps through the creek, through the woods, back toward the life he had momentarily left behind. He did not look back. He didn't need to. He knew the bear would still be there, where it had always been, where it always would be. But he also knew he was not the same man who had followed it into the wild. The walk back was not as simple as Nathan had expected. The sun was lower now, dipping behind the thick trees, casting long golden streaks of light across the forest floor. Shadows stretched between the trunks, deepening as dusk settled in, and Nathan realized just how far he had wandered. The way had seemed effortless when following the bear, but now, without its steady presence leading the way, the land felt unfamiliar. He knew the general direction of his cabin, knew he only had to keep heading west. But the trees all looked the same, the paths twisting in ways that hadn't seemed so complicated before. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. He wasn't lost, at least, not yet. His boots crunched against the fallen leaves, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. He retraced his steps across the creek, carefully placing his feet on the slick stones. But as he reached the other side, his balance wavered. The rock beneath him shifted unexpectedly, and before he could steady himself, his foot slipped. A sharp jolt of pain shot up his leg as his ankle twisted, sending him sprawling into the mud. The shock of the fall left him breathless for a moment, his hands sinking into the cold, wet ground. He cursed under his breath, gritting his teeth as he sat up, testing his weight gingerly. A flare of pain radiated from his ankle, not broken, but badly sprained. The reality of his situation settled in. The sun was nearly gone now, the forest dimming rapidly. He had no flashlight, no phone signal this deep in the woods, and now, no reliable way to move quickly. He had planned to return before dark, to cook a quiet dinner by the fire, to fall asleep in the familiar comfort of his cabin, but nature had its own plans. He pressed his fingers into the tender skin around his ankle, wincing. He could walk, but not well, and certainly not fast. If he didn't find his way back soon, he would have no choice but to spend the night out here. A shiver ran down his spine, not from fear, but from the sheer unpredictability of the situation. The forest at night was a different world. He had always known that, had always respected it. Now he was about to experience it firsthand. He pushed himself up, testing his weight again, forcing himself to move forward despite the pain. Every step was slow, deliberate, his senses sharpening in the growing darkness. The sounds of the forest had changed. Birds had quieted, replaced by the distant hoots of an owl, the occasional rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. The wind sighed through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp moss, cool and clean and endless. Nathan's breath came slow and measured as he hobbled forward, pausing every few minutes to gather his bearings. He focused on his surroundings, on the faintest slivers of light filtering through the canopy, on the subtle dips and rises in the land. He had spent months living on the edge of this wilderness, studying it, learning its rhythms. Now that knowledge was being tested. A distant crack, like a branch snapping, made him still. His pulse quickened, and he turned his head toward the sound, scanning the trees. His mind immediately conjured images of the coyotes from earlier, of predators that roamed these woods at night. He reminded himself that most animals avoided humans, that the true danger was not them but the cold, the darkness, the disorientation that could so easily lead a man in circles. Still, he moved more cautiously, listening intently. Minutes passed, then an hour, the ache in his ankle growing worse with every step. He was slowing down. His body was tiring. A creeping doubt settled in his chest. Was he going the right way? The landmarks he thought he recognized no longer looked familiar. He paused, exhaling through his nose, trying to calm the frustration gnawing at him. Panic would do him no good. He needed to think. He needed to. Another sound, this time closer. A steady rustling, deliberate and heavy. His breath caught as he turned. And there, standing just a few yards away, was the bear. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was darker now, but he could still make out the massive shape, the familiar silhouette of the creature he had followed so blindly just hours ago. Its eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light, reflecting the last remnants of the sky. It wasn't charging, wasn't threatening. It was simply there, watching. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Nathan swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay still. He had spent weeks growing accustomed to the bear's presence, learning to respect its quiet nature. But this was different. This was the wild at night, when instincts ruled over understanding. He didn't know what the bear was thinking, didn't know if his earlier curiosity had been mistaken for something more dangerous. Yet deep down, he felt something he couldn't explain. The bear had been leading him before. Had it come back to do the same? A gust of wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the crisp scent of damp bark and distant rain. The bear exhaled loudly, a deep, almost contemplative sound, then turned slowly, deliberately, before stepping forward, back into the trees. Nathan's fingers curled at his sides. His body ached, his ankle throbbed, his exhaustion weighed on him like an anchor. But as he watched the bear disappear into the darkness, he knew what he had to do. He followed. The pain in his leg made it difficult, but he pushed forward, trusting the rhythm of the bear's movements, trusting the silent understanding that had grown between them. The bear never looked back, never acknowledged him, but it didn't disappear, didn't lose him in the twisting paths of the forest. It led. Nathan followed. Time stretched and folded into itself, the night a veil of endless shadow and shifting shapes. But then, something familiar. A scent, a feeling in the air, a shift in the ground beneath his feet. And then he saw it, the faint glow of his cabin's windows through the trees. Relief crashed over him like a wave, his muscles nearly buckling. He had made it. Or rather, the bear had brought him back. He turned, searching the darkness, but the bear was already gone. Nathan stood there for a long time, staring into the trees, listening to the quiet. He didn't know if the bear had meant to help him. He didn't know if he had imagined the entire thing, if exhaustion had warped his perception of the night. But he did know one thing: he had never been truly alone in these woods. The wilderness was not just something he lived near. It was something that lived with him, something that had accepted his presence just as he had come to accept it. And as he stepped onto the porch, as he opened the door to the familiar warmth of his home, he felt something settle deep within him, a knowledge, a quiet, unshakable truth. He would never see the forest the same way again. The morning light spilled through the windows of Nathan's cabin, painting the wooden floors in soft amber. He sat on the edge of his bed, his ankle wrapped tightly with a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt, the dull ache still pulsing beneath the bandage. His muscles were stiff, his body weary from the night before, but his mind was restless. He had slept only in brief intervals, waking repeatedly to the memory of the bear, to the moment he had seen his cabin emerge from the darkness, to the realization that, without the animal's silent guidance, he might never have made it home at all. It was absurd, wasn't it? The idea that a wild creature, one that should have viewed him as nothing more than an intruder, had somehow led him to safety. Yet the more he thought about it, the less he could deny the truth of what had happened. The bear had been there, waiting, watching, and when he needed it most, it had shown him the way. Nathan rose slowly, wincing as he put weight on his injured foot. He braced himself against the nightstand and exhaled, shaking his head at his own foolishness. He had been reckless, following an animal into the wilderness with no plan, no supplies. He was lucky his injury hadn't been worse, lucky the night had not swallowed him whole. And yet, even as he told himself he needed to be more careful, that he couldn't afford to make the same mistake again, another thought gnawed at the back of his mind. If he had the chance to do it over, would he? Would he trade what he had seen, what he had felt, just to play it safe? He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. The day stretched ahead of him in uneasy silence. He moved slowly through his cabin, making coffee, sitting by the fire, flipping through the pages of a book without truly reading. His body was here, but his mind was still out there, wandering through the trees, tracing the steps of the bear. He found himself stepping onto the porch more than once, his eyes scanning the edge of the woods, waiting for a dark shape to emerge from the trees. But the bear did not come. He told himself he shouldn't expect it to. It had never truly belonged to him, never been something he could summon or predict. It was a force of nature, wild and untethered. It owed him nothing. By midday, frustration coiled tight in his chest. He couldn't sit here, drowning in his own thoughts, waiting for something that might never happen. His ankle still throbbed, but the pain was manageable, and he refused to be confined to his cabin like a wounded animal. He grabbed his coat, moving carefully down the porch steps, testing his balance on the uneven ground. His movements were slow, but he made his way toward the creek, retracing the path he had taken just yesterday. The forest felt different in the daylight, less mysterious, more open. The trees no longer loomed in shadow but stood tall and steady, bathed in golden light. The fear he had felt last night seemed distant now, almost laughable. He had survived. He was still here. Reaching the water's edge, Nathan knelt, dipping his hands into the icy current, letting the cold sting his fingers before splashing it against his face. The creek had always been a source of clarity for him, a place where he could pause, breathe, let the weight of his thoughts drift with the moving water. He sat on a flat rock nearby, watching the ripples dance along the surface, watching the light bend and shift through the shallows. His heartbeat slowed, the tension in his shoulders eased. And then, movement. A rustling in the brush. A familiar sound. His pulse quickened, but he did not turn immediately, did not react with fear or urgency. He waited, listening, letting the moment unfold on its own. And then, stepping into view, the bear appeared. It was as if the forest itself had breathed life into the shadows, manifesting the creature from the very air. It moved with that same effortless grace, its heavy paws barely disturbing the earth beneath it. Nathan did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched as the bear lowered its great head, sniffing the ground as if searching for something unseen. It took a few steps closer, pausing at the water's edge, its dark eyes reflecting the sunlight that danced along the rippling current. It did not look at him, not directly, but Nathan felt its awareness, felt the quiet understanding that had grown between them. A strange thought crossed his mind then, one that sent a shiver down his spine despite the warmth of the sun. Had the bear known he would come here? Had it been waiting for him? The idea was absurd, and yet, deep in his chest, he felt the quiet certainty of it. The bear had come back. It had come back for him. Nathan exhaled slowly, steadying his breath. He did not want to disturb the moment, did not want to break whatever fragile thread connected them. So he remained still, content to simply share the space, to exist alongside the creature without expectation. The bear waded into the creek, unbothered by the chill of the water, its powerful frame moving through the current with ease. It drank deeply, then lifted its head, water dripping from its muzzle, the sunlight catching on its damp fur. Nathan found himself mesmerized by the sheer presence of the animal, by the way it belonged so effortlessly to the world around it. And then, finally, the bear looked at him. It was not a glance, not a fleeting acknowledgement, but something more, a deliberate meeting of eyes, a moment stretched between them, weighty and unspoken. Nathan felt something stir inside him, something primal and wordless, an understanding that transcended logic or explanation. The bear had led him through the forest. The bear had brought him home. And now, in the quiet space between them, Nathan knew this was not just coincidence. This was not random. There was meaning here, even if he could not yet grasp it. The bear huffed softly, then turned, stepping out of the water, shaking droplets from its coat. It did not linger. It did not wait for him to move or speak. It simply walked past him, brushing against the edge of the trees, vanishing into the depths of the wilderness once more. Nathan sat there long after it had gone, staring at the place where it had disappeared, his thoughts a tangled web of wonder and uncertainty. He had come here seeking solitude, seeking an escape from the chaos of his old life. But the bear had given him something else entirely, a connection, a purpose, a lesson he had yet to fully understand. As he stood, his ankle protesting the movement, he realized something with startling clarity. He had spent his life looking for meaning in the noise, in the demands of the world, in the expectations placed upon him. But here, in the heart of the wilderness, meaning was not something to be sought. It was something to be felt, something that found you when you were ready to listen. And Nathan was listening now. The days that followed were different. Nathan no longer moved through his life as a man merely occupying space in the wilderness. He had always thought himself respectful of nature, aware of its quiet rhythms. But now, he understood that he had been little more than a visitor, a spectator who watched from the edges, always separate, never truly a part of it. But something had changed. The bear had changed him. It was a shift so subtle that he might not have recognized it if not for the way everything around him seemed to breathe with new life. The wind carried a different weight. The rustling of the trees spoke a language he almost understood. And the silence, oh, the silence, no longer felt empty. It was full. Full of unseen movement, of stories unfolding in the places he had once overlooked. He moved differently now, more carefully, more in tune with the land beneath his feet. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he acted. He found himself rising at dawn, stepping onto the porch as the sky bled from deep purple to gold, breathing in the scent of damp earth and morning air. He walked along the creek, feeling the cold bite of the water against his fingertips, pressing his palm against the rough bark of ancient trees as if hoping to absorb some of their quiet wisdom. And always, his eyes drifted toward the tree-line. Searching. The bear had not returned, not since that moment at the water's edge. Nathan told himself that it was right, that he should not expect it to, that the wild did not exist for him, did not bend to his desires. But still, a part of him hoped. A part of him waited. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, he sat outside with a mug of coffee cradled between his hands, the steam curling into the crisp autumn air. The sky was painted in fire, streaks of orange and violet stretching endlessly above the darkening treetops. He had lived here for months, had seen countless sunsets, but this one felt different. There was a weight to it, an unspoken finality. He let the warmth of the cup seep into his fingers, staring out into the woods, wondering if the bear was still out there, moving through the shadows, existing beyond his reach. Maybe he would never see it again. Maybe that was the way it was meant to be. And then, as if answering the thought itself, there was movement at the edge of the trees. Nathan's breath caught, his body going still. The bear stood there, half shrouded in shadow, watching. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something that pressed against Nathan's chest with a force he could not name. He did not move, did not speak, did not dare to break the fragile moment. The bear did not approach. It simply stood, the golden light of the setting sun catching on the edges of its dark fur, its eyes locked onto his. Nathan felt his pulse slow, his mind quiet. He did not know what this was, what it meant, only that it was real, that it mattered. A gust of wind whispered through the trees, and just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear turned. It walked back into the forest without hesitation, without looking back. Nathan did not follow. For the first time, he understood. This had never been about chasing something, about capturing an experience or clinging to a moment. The bear had come when he needed it, had shown him what he needed to see, had led him not just through the forest, but to something greater. And now, it was time to let go. Nathan sat there long after the bear had gone, staring at the darkened woods, feeling the weight of everything settle into his bones. He had spent so much of his life searching for meaning, for purpose, for something beyond the noise of the world. And here, in the quiet of the wilderness, he had found it, not in answers, but in acceptance. In the understanding that some things were not meant to be held onto, only experienced. That some things were not meant to be followed, only respected. That night, he slept deeply, dreamlessly, the kind of sleep that comes only when something within has settled, when the restless parts of a person have finally found stillness. When he woke, the sky was a pale gray, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool air, and for the first time in a long time, he did not look toward the trees. He did not wait. He did not search. Instead, he turned back to his cabin, to the quiet life he had built, to the rhythm of days that would continue on unchanged, yet irrevocably different. The bear had given him something he had not known he was missing. And now, as he stood on the porch, watching the world come alive with the first light of morning, he understood what he had to do. Live. Not in waiting. Not in chasing. But in being.